Step in the cage, bitch. Publicly, I need a warm-up bag.
Julian Shaw kept mopping, didn't look up. Cole Braddock kicked the bucket over. Dirty water everywhere.
You deaf?
No, sir. I'm sorry.
Braddock grabbed his collar, yanked him close.
Humility. A bastard like you begged for months to get this job. So shut up and obey.
Please. I can't lose this. I'm begging you.
Braddock
Shut your
hurled the
mouth!
mop across the room.
Get in there!
30 fighters watched. Nobody moved. Julian stood, slowly. Looked at Braddock the way you look at someone who just made the worst decision of their life.
Only if you promise not to cry.
Oh, shit.
The gym went dead. Nobody knew what was about to happen, but every single one of them would remember it forever.
Crazy. But before I show you what went down, you need to know who this man really is. Most people walk into a gym and see fighters, champions, contenders, hungry kids with something to prove. Nobody walks in and sees the man with the mop. That's the first mistake. The mop hit the concrete at 4:47 every morning. Same stroke, same rhythm. Julian Shaw pushed his bucket down the main corridor of Apex MMA Training Center while Las Vegas still flickered its last neon prayers into the desert dark. He moved through the gym like smoke, past the octagon with its blood-stained canvas, past the row of heavy bags hanging like sleeping giants, past the wall of champions framed photographs of fighters with jaws clenched and fists raised. Men who had turned pain into paychecks. 34 years old, lean frame hidden under a faded gray janitor's uniform 2 sizes too big. Quiet eyes that watched everything and said nothing. He wore earbuds that were never plugged into anything. He just didn't want people to talk to him. His hands told a different story than the mop. Thick calluses lined his knuckles, not the soft pads that come from wringing rags, but hard ridges built from years of impact. 2 knuckles on his right hand sat slightly flat, reset after fractures that never saw a doctor. The kind of hands that knew what a fist was for. But nobody looks at a janitor's hands. That's the second mistake. By 6, the fighters started trickling in. They moved around Julian the way water moves around a stone in a river, without thinking, without seeing. A pair of boxing gloves tumbled off the bench and landed at his feet. The welterweight who dropped them, a kid with fresh tattoos and a contract he wouldn't stop talking about, stepped right over them. Right over Julian's mop. Didn't look down. Julian picked up the gloves, set them neatly on the bench, kept mopping. In the far corner, a heavy bag hung crooked. The carabiner clip had loosened overnight, tilting the bag at an angle that would wreck anyone's combinations. Julian set down his mop, reached up, and unhooked the clip. His fingers moved fast. A double-loop figure-8 knot, military precision, the kind they teach at airborne school, secured the bag in 3 seconds flat. Perfect tension. 0 slack. Nobody saw it. He picked up the mop and worked his way toward the back wall, past the supplement bar, past the recovery room with its ice baths and foam rollers, all the way to the far end where a poster covered half the wall. Cole Braddock, UFC middleweight champion, 22 wins, 1 loss. The poster caught him mid-scream, veins bulging, the gold belt slung over his shoulder like a trophy kill. Julian stopped. He looked up at Braddock's face, the wide jaw, the dead eyes, the fists wrapped in tape and glory. Something moved behind his expression. Not anger, not admiration. Something older and heavier than both. The look of a man who knows exactly what those fists can do, because his own once did it better. Then it was gone. Julian dipped the mop back into the bucket, wrung it out, and kept cleaning. The floor wasn't going to do itself. The double doors slammed open at 9:15. You could hear the entourage before you saw it. Cole Braddock walked in like he owned the building. In a way, he did. His face was on the banners. His name was on the sponsorship wall. His highlight reels played on the flat screens above the treadmills on an endless loop. Apex MMA didn't belong to him on paper. But paper didn't matter when you were the biggest draw in the middleweight division. 28 years old, 22 wins, 1 loss, a split decision in his second pro fight that he still blamed on the judges. 3 title defenses, a jaw built from granite, and an ego built from never being told no. He rolled in with his full crew, 2 sparring partners, a strength coach, a nutritionist carrying a cooler, and a videographer with a shoulder-mounted camera because Braddock didn't take a breath without documenting it for his 3 million followers. Julian was on his knees near the cage, scrubbing a rust stain out of the concrete. He heard the doors, didn't look up. Braddock walked straight toward the octagon. His sneakers left muddy prints across the section Julian had just finished. Fresh streaks over wet concrete. Julian stared at the prints, said nothing, reached for his rag. "Hey!" Braddock's voice bounced off the walls. He was looking down at Julian now, not at him, down at him, the way people look at furniture. "You missed a spot." A few fighters by the speed bags chuckled, not because it was funny, because Braddock expected them to. Julian wiped the mud. Quiet, methodical. Braddock turned to the camera. The red light was on. He grinned the kind of grin that gets 1 million likes and makes decent people uncomfortable. "You see this guy?" He pointed at Julian without looking at him. "This is what happens when you got no talent, no ambition, and no future. You end up on your knees, cleaning up after real men." He let the line hang in the air. The videographer zoomed in on Julian's face. Julian didn't give him anything. Blank. Flat. A wall with a pulse. Braddock snapped his fingers. "Yo, mop boy, bring me water." Julian stood, walked to the cooler by the wall, brought back a bottle, held it out. Braddock took it, cracked the seal, took 1 sip, then tipped the rest onto the floor. Slowly, deliberately. The water pooled around Julian's work boots, soaking into the laces. "Oops," Braddock smirked. "Better get that." The gym was watching now. Every heavy bag had stopped swinging. Every jump rope had gone still. 24 phones were out. Ray Coleman, the head trainer, the man who had built Apex from a garage gym into the best facility in Nevada, stood by the front desk with his arms crossed. His jaw was tight. His eyes were hard. But he didn't move. Nobody did. That's the thing about power. It doesn't just silence the person it hits. It silences every witness in the room. Julian looked at the puddle, looked at Braddock. Then he knelt back down and wiped it up. 1 slow stroke after another. Braddock laughed and turned back to his crew. "C knows his place." But there was a moment, half a second, maybe less, when Julian's hand stopped moving. His fingers wrapped around the rag so tight his knuckles went white. The tendons in his forearm stood out like steel cables under skin. Then it passed. His hand relaxed. His face stayed empty. He wrung out the rag, dropped it in the bucket, and went back to scrubbing the rust stain like nothing had happened. Ray Coleman watched from across the room. He was the only person in the gym who noticed Julian's hands. The way the fingers curled, not in anger, but in discipline. The kind of discipline that doesn't come from mopping floors. He was the only person who understood what that kind of control cost. Braddock's sparring partners lasted about as long as you'd expect. The first one, a light heavyweight named Torres with decent hands and a questionable chin, walked into a right hook 30 seconds in. He hit the canvas, bounced once, and stayed down for a 4 count before waving it off. Braddock stood over him with his arms spread wide, mugging for the camera like he'd just won a title fight. The second partner made it 90 seconds. A wrestler named Briggs, who tried to take Braddock down twice and got stuffed both times. The third attempt earned him a knee to the body that folded him in half. He tapped from the clinch, gasping. Braddock shoved him away and spat out his mouthpiece. "That's it!" He looked around the gym, bouncing on his toes, barely winded. Sweat glistened on his shoulders, but his breathing was still even. "Somebody give me a round, a real one." Nobody volunteered. The fighters along the wall suddenly found their water bottles very interesting, their shoelaces extremely compelling. You don't raise your hand when a champion is hunting for a target. Not unless you want to become one. Braddock's eyes scanned the room, past the heavyweights pretending to stretch, past the bantamweight shadowboxing with his back turned, all the way to the far corner, where Julian Shaw was quietly coiling a garden hose near the back door. A smile spread across Braddock's face. The wrong kind of smile. "Hey, mop boy," Julian kept coiling. "I'm talking to you." Braddock walked toward him, pulling off one glove with his teeth. "You ever thrown a punch? Or do your people only throw dice on the corner?" A few nervous laughs, then silence. Julian looked up. His face gave away nothing. "Once or twice?" "Once or twice." Braddock repeated it to the camera, shaking his head. "Get in here. Let's go. I'll even let you swing first." He pointed at the cage. "For fun." Ray Coleman stepped forward. "Cole, he's maintenance staff. Leave it alone." "Relax, old man. I'm not going to hurt him." Braddock winked at the camera. "Much." Coleman looked at Julian. Something passed between them. A question asked and answered without words. Julian set the hose down, rolled his shoulders once. Then he pulled his janitor's shirt over his head, and the gym went quiet. The body underneath didn't belong to a man who mopped floors. Shoulders cut from years of resistance. A torso lean and hard as a welded frame. Muscle that wasn't built for show, it was built for function. For speed and impact and survival. And across his left rib cage, a scar. Long, jagged, the kind that comes from something sharper than a fist. Pete Harmon, a retired cornerman who had worked with 3 world champions, was sitting on a folding chair near the water fountain. He stood up so fast the chair skidded backward, his eyes locked on Julian's torso, on the scar. On the way, Julian rolled his wrists as he picked up a pair of gloves, loose, practiced, automatic, the way a soldier checks his weapon before entering a room. "I've seen that before," Harmon whispered. Nobody heard him. Braddock was still smiling, still bouncing, still performing. Julian pulled the gloves on, flexed his fingers, looked at Braddock with an expression that was almost gentle, almost sad, the way a man looks at someone who has no idea what's coming. Then he smiled. For the first time in anyone's memory, Julian Shaw smiled inside the gym. "Only if you promise not to cry." The words landed like a grenade in a library. Braddock's smile vanished. His neck flushed red. The cameras caught every second. Nobody in the gym had ever spoken to Cole Braddock like that. Not his opponents, not the press, not even the commissioner who fined him $50,000 for his post-fight antics. And certainly not a janitor. Braddock bit down on his mouthpiece and stepped into the cage. 8 years earlier, Julian Shaw was a different man in a different world. Staff Sergeant Julian Shaw, United States Army, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Combatives Instructor Level 4, the highest certification the military offered. He didn't just know how to fight. He taught other men how to survive when fighting was the only option left. His unit was Special Operations Support. The soldiers who came through his program were Rangers, Green Berets, operators who had already proven themselves in places most people couldn't find on a map. Julian's job was to make them better, faster, harder to kill, and he was the best at it, because he was the best at the thing itself. 46 consecutive wins in the All-Army Combatives Tournament, a record that stood unchallenged for 4 years after he left. They called him the Phantom because nobody could figure out how he moved. His striking was rooted in boxing. His grandfather had trained Golden Gloves fighters in a basement gym in Baltimore. But somewhere along the way, Julian had absorbed wrestling, judo, Muay Thai, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu into a style that had no name and no category. It was just his. Fluid, adaptive, impossible to game plan for. Coaches who watched him said it was like fighting water. You could swing at it all day. It just moved around you and drowned you from behind. Outside the base, Julian had another life. Friday nights in Fayetteville, in a warehouse behind a tire shop on Bragg Boulevard, there was a cage. No sanctioning body, no medicals, no records. Just fighters and money and the sound of bone meeting bone under bad fluorescent lights. Julian fought there as the Phantom. 31 fights, 31 wins, 22 by knockout or submission. Nobody knew his real name. Nobody knew he was military. He wore a plain black mouthguard and no walkout music. He just showed up, fought, and disappeared into the Carolina night. It was Terrence who changed everything. Terrence Shaw, Julian's younger brother. 22 years old, with the same build, the same hands, and the same stubborn fire that ran in the Shaw bloodline like a second heartbeat. He worshipped Julian, wanted to be Julian, followed him to Fayetteville one Friday night, and saw what his older brother could do inside a cage. After that, there was no stopping him. Terrence started training. Julian tried to talk him out of it, then tried to slow him down. Then gave up and started coaching him because if Terrence was going to fight, Julian wanted to make sure he was ready. He wasn't ready. 7 months in, Terrence took a fight against a man 20 pounds heavier and 5 years more experienced. Julian told him not to take it. Terrence took it anyway, because 22-year-olds don't listen to anybody, not even the people who love them most. The fight lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Terrence ate a head kick in the third exchange, a shin that caught him flush on the temple. He dropped straight down. No stagger, no wobble, just down. His head bounced off the canvas with a sound Julian would hear in his sleep for the next 8 years. And the warehouse went from screaming to silent in half a heartbeat. No doctor on site, no ambulance on standby. Just a kid on a dirty canvas floor, bleeding from his ear, while his older brother held his head and screamed his name into the noise of nothing. Terrence spent 3 months in a coma at Womack Army Medical Center. The swelling never fully subsided. The damage was too deep, too wide, too permanent. He died on a Tuesday afternoon in October, with Julian sitting beside him, holding the same hand he used to hold when they crossed streets as kids in Baltimore. Julian resigned his commission the following week, packed one bag, left Fort Bragg at 3 a.m, and never went back. He drifted for 2 years. Odd jobs, warehouse work, night shift security at truck stops and strip malls. He ended up in Las Vegas because it was the last city that reminded him of nothing. And when he saw the listing for a janitor at Apex MMA, he took it. Not because he needed the money, because he needed to be near the thing that had taken everything from him. Close enough to hear the gloves pop against heavy bags. Close enough to smell the canvas and the sweat. But never close enough to step inside the cage again. Until today. Word spread through Apex MMA the way fire spreads through dry brush, fast, chaotic, and impossible to contain. Within 5 minutes, every fighter in the building had migrated toward the octagon. The ones who had been in the locker room came out with towels around their necks. The ones on the treadmills stepped off mid-sprint. Even the receptionist locked the front desk and walked to the cage. They formed a ring 3 deep around the octagon. Phones were already out. Someone propped open the back door, and 2 fighters from the boxing gym next door wandered in, drawn by the noise. Or rather, drawn by the sudden absence of it. Apex was never this quiet during morning hours. A bantamweight named Cliff Porter opened Instagram Live from the front row. Within 60 seconds, 800 people were watching. Within 3 minutes, 4,000. The title of the stream read, UFC champ about to spar the janitor, Lamau. Inside the cage, Braddock shadowboxed in the center. Loose, fast, rolling his neck, popping his shoulders, throwing combinations at the air like it owed him money. Every movement was designed for the camera. Every exhale was a performance. Julian stood in the opposite corner. Ray Coleman had handed him a pair of worn 16-ounce gloves, the kind they use for sparring, not fighting. Padded enough to prevent cuts, but not padded enough to prevent damage. Not if the person wearing them knew where to put them. Coleman helped Julian lace up. His fingers moved quickly, but his eyes stayed on Julian's face. "You don't have to do this," he said, quiet enough that only Julian could hear. "I know. You haven't been in a cage in 8 years." Julian flexed his fingers inside the gloves. The leather creaked. "The cage hasn't changed." Coleman studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded once and stepped back through the door. The atmosphere in the gym had shifted. It started as entertainment, a champion playing with his food, a punchline waiting to happen. But something about Julian's stillness had changed the temperature. He wasn't pacing, wasn't stretching, wasn't talking. He stood in the corner with his hands at his sides and his weight centered, and he watched Braddock the way a surgeon watches a patient before the first cut. Calm. Focused. Reading. The fighters closest to the cage noticed it first. Julian's stance. His feet were shoulder-width apart, left foot forward, toes angled at 45 degrees. His knees were slightly bent, his hips low. His center of gravity dropped below his waist. It wasn't a boxing stance. It wasn't a kickboxing stance. It was something older, something military. Pete Harmon noticed it too. He had pushed his way to the front row and was gripping the chain link with both hands, his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. His lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. Just 2 words, over and over. No way. No way. Braddock's coach, a compact man named Steve Aldridge with a shaved head and a clipboard, leaned into the cage. 2 rounds. 3. Braddock popped his mouthpiece in. However long it takes. Aldridge looked at Julian, looked back at Braddock. Something in his expression said this might have been a mistake, but he didn't say it out loud. He never did. The cage door closed. The latch clicked shut. Cliff Porter's live stream had hit 12,000 viewers. The comments were scrolling so fast they blurred into white noise. Braddock touched gloves. Julian touched back. Light. Polite. The way you shake hands with someone you're about to ruin. The bell rang. Braddock came forward like a freight train with a grudge. No feeling out round. No measuring distance. He launched an overhand right within the first 2 seconds, the same punch that had put 14 professional fighters on the canvas. 195 pounds of muscle and malice behind a fist that traveled in a tight arc toward Julian's jaw. Julian's head moved 3 inches to the left. The fist cut through the space where his chin had been and kept going, pulling Braddock slightly off balance. Julian didn't counter, didn't step back. He just reset, hands low, and watched. Braddock came again. Jab, cross, low kick to the lead leg. The jab missed by an inch. The cross whiffed past Julian's ear. The low kick connected, barely with Julian's shin, and Braddock felt it immediately. It was like kicking a fire hydrant. Julian hadn't checked the kick with technique. His shin was just that dense, that hardened, conditioned by years of something Braddock couldn't name. The gym murmured. Braddock threw a 3-piece combination. Left hook, right straight, spinning back elbow. His signature sequence. The one ESPN had replayed 600 times in slow motion. Julian slipped the hook by rolling under it, pulled his head back from the straight. And when the spinning elbow came around, he simply wasn't there anymore. He had taken 1 step to his right, smooth as a door swinging open, and let Braddock's momentum carry him into empty air. The murmur became a gasp. Julian wasn't blocking. He wasn't covering up. He wasn't using the clinch or grabbing or stalling. He was doing something that shouldn't have been possible against the UFC middleweight champion of the world. He was dodging everything. His footwork was unlike anything the fighters at Apex had ever seen. It wasn't flashy, no lateral bounces, no Ali shuffles, no showboating. Julian moved the way a compass needle moves, small, precise, always pointing to safety. His feet barely left the floor. His weight shifted like mercury rolling across a tilted surface. Every step had purpose, 0 wasted motion. It looked effortless, and that was the most terrifying part, because nothing is effortless unless you've done it 10,000 times. Braddock threw 12 unanswered strikes in the first 90 seconds. 12 punches, kicks, and elbows from a man who was paid millions to land them. None connected clean. Julian hadn't thrown a single punch. Pete Harmon was gripping the cage so hard his fingers had turned white. "Military combatives," he said, loud enough now for the people around him to hear. "That's military footwork. That boy was trained by the United States Army." Heads turned. Phones shifted. The live stream comments exploded. At the 2-minute mark, Julian threw his first strike. A single jab. Short, compact, and impossibly fast. The kind of punch that doesn't look like much on camera, but sounds like a stapler punching through cardboard when it lands. It landed dead center on Braddock's forehead. Light, precise, not hard enough to hurt, hard enough to say something. "I can touch you whenever I want. Braddock blinked, backed up one step. For the first time in maybe his entire career, Cole Braddock moved backward without choosing to. His body retreated before his brain could override the instinct. The gym erupted. Not in cheers, in noise. That raw, involuntary sound a crowd makes when they realize they're watching something they weren't supposed to see. Braddock reset, shook his head, came forward again. This time, more cautious, hands higher, chin tucked. He threw a feinted jab into a power low kick, a combination drilled 10,000 times. Julian checked the kick. Proper technique. Shin to shin. The crack echoed through the gym like a dry branch snapping. Braddock winced, withdrew. The bell rang. Braddock walked to his corner chest, heaving, sweat pouring down his temples. His coach Aldrich handed him water and leaned in close. Whatever he said, Braddock didn't like it. His jaw tightened. His eyes stayed locked on Julian across the cage. Julian stood in his corner, arms at his sides, breathing through his nose. His chest rose and fell with the rhythm of a resting heartbeat. He hadn't broken a sweat. Ray Coleman stood outside the cage, arms crossed, eyes shining. Not with surprise, with recognition. The look of a man watching something ancient wake up. Nah, hold up. You're telling me a whole UFC champion just got backed up by a jab from the Janitor? Imagine you're Braddock right now. You talk all that trash, call this man every name in the book, and he's standing there not even sweating. I'd be terrified.
Round 2 started differently. Braddock didn't charge. He came out, measured, technical, the way his coaches had spent years teaching him. Hands up, chin down, small steps, probing jabs to find range. He was done performing. The cameras were still rolling, but Braddock wasn't playing for them anymore. He was fighting for real now, and everyone in the gym could feel the shift in the air, like a pressure drop before a storm. Julian met him in the center. Same stance, same calm, but something in his eyes had changed too. The sadness was still there. It never really left, but layered over it now was something sharper. Focus, the kind that makes the air around a man feel thinner. Braddock threw a jab-cross-hook combination. Clean, fast, professional grade. Julian slipped the first two and caught the hook on his forearm. Not a block, but a deflection. He redirected Braddock's fist past his ear and answered with a short right hand to the body. It landed below the ribs on the left side. Liver shot. Surgical. Braddock grunted. Not loud, just enough for Julian to hear. Julian stepped back. Reset. Let Braddock recover. That's when the fighters at Apex started to understand. Julian wasn't just dodging anymore. He was fighting back. And every shot he threw had an address. He wasn't swinging at Braddock's body. He was targeting specific organs, specific nerves, specific pressure points that most fighters didn't even know existed. Each strike was a sentence in a language most of them didn't speak. Braddock attacked again. This time he mixed in wrestling, a level change, a shot to the hips. Julian sprawled hard, driving his hips down and his hands into the back of Braddock's neck. The sprawl was textbook, better than textbook. It was the kind of sprawl that ends wrestling careers. Braddock scrambled back to his feet. Julian let him up. "Stop letting me up," Braddock hissed through his mouthpiece. Julian said nothing. Braddock came forward with a Muay Thai clinch double collar tie, pulling Julian's head down into a knee. Julian countered with a move that made Pete Harmon grab the shoulder of the man next to him. He swam his arms inside Braddock's clinch, broke the grip with a sharp upward pop, then landed his own clinch, a single collar tie with wrist control, and delivered 2 knees to Braddock's thigh. Not the head, not the body, the thigh, controlled, measured, a message, not a punishment. He pushed Braddock away gently, like he was closing a door he didn't want to slam. The live stream had crossed 200,000 viewers. Cliff Porter's phone was so hot it was burning his fingers, but he didn't dare move it. The comments were a waterfall of disbelief. Who is this guy? No way. This is real. Braddock is getting schooled by a janitor. Braddock's face had changed. The arrogance was gone. The showmanship was gone.
What was left was something raw and animal, the face of a man who has just realized he is not the predator in this room. He was breathing hard. His lead leg was compromised from the knee strikes. His left side ached from the liver shot. And the worst part, the part that was eating him alive, was that Julian wasn't even trying. Julian was fighting the way a teacher corrects a student, patiently, precisely, without malice, without hurry. Braddock erupted. He threw a wild, flying knee, a desperation move, the kind you see in the last 10 seconds of a fight when nothing else has worked. It was fast, it was athletic, and it was exactly the kind of mistake Julian had been waiting for. Julian sidestepped, 1 step, half a second. The knee sailed past his shoulder, and as Braddock's momentum carried him forward, Julian drove a hook into his body, right side, just beneath the floating rib. The punch wasn't flashy. It was short and dark and vicious, and it landed with a sound like someone dropping a hardcover book on a tile floor. Braddock's knees buckled. He didn't fall. He sagged. His right knee touched the canvas for a fraction of a second before he caught himself. But everyone saw it. Every phone caught it. The champion's knee touched the ground. The man who had never been dropped in 22 professional fights just buckled from a body shot thrown by a janitor. The gym went volcanic. Steve Aldrich threw a towel over the cage. It landed on the canvas like a white flag. "That's enough, Cole." Braddock ripped the towel off the ground and hurled it back. "Don't you dare!" He stood back up, swaying, eyes locked on Julian. The mouthpiece was barely hanging from his teeth. Blood from a cut inside his lip had started to stain the canvas in small pink drops. Julian watched him. There was no satisfaction in his face, no triumph. If anything, he looked tired. Not physically, emotionally. Like every punch he threw cost him something that couldn't be measured in calories or counted in rounds. Ray Coleman pressed his face against the cage from outside. His voice cracked. "Julian!" Julian looked at him, just for a second. Something passed between them, not a plan, but an understanding. Coleman knew who Julian was now. He was certain of it, and he knew what was coming next. The third round started with Braddock throwing everything he had left. It wasn't strategy anymore. It wasn't game planning. It was pride. Raw, wounded, desperate pride. Driving a man forward when every signal in his body was telling him to stop. His combinations were still fast, still dangerous, but they were wider now, sloppier. Fatigue was pulling his elbows out and dropping his hands between exchanges. His footwork had lost its crispness. He was planting his feet flat instead of staying on the balls, and Julian saw every single one of these fractures forming in real time. Because Julian had been watching for them, patiently, the way a man watches a clock when he knows exactly what time something ends. Braddock loaded up a right hand, everything he had, every ounce of frustration and humiliation packed into one punch. He threw it with a grunt that sounded more like a scream. Julian slipped it, clean, final. And then he changed. The switch was instant. There was no transition, no warm-up, no gradual shift from defensive to offensive. 1 second, Julian was the man with the mop, quiet, patient, invisible. The next second, he was the Phantom, the man who went 31-0 in a warehouse in Fayetteville, the man who dismantled Special Forces operators in 3-minute rounds, the man who had walked away from the only thing he was ever great at and was now walking back in. Julian's first real combination landed before Braddock could reset his guard. A jab that snapped Braddock's head back like a hinge. A cross that found the gap between his gloves and crashed into his cheek. An uppercut that lifted Braddock onto his toes. And then, as Braddock's hands flew up to protect his face, a left hook to the body that folded him at the waist like a letter being creased. 4 punches, less than 2 seconds. Each one placed with the precision of a man threading a needle at full sprint. The gym screamed. Braddock stumbled backward. His legs were there, but the wiring was failing. The signals from his brain arriving half a second too late. The muscles responding to commands that were already outdated. Julian followed him. Not chasing, walking, closing the distance with the calm of a man who knows exactly where this ends. Braddock threw a wild hook. Julian ducked under it, changed levels, and executed a trip takedown so clean it looked choreographed. His right leg hooked behind Braddock's ankle while his hands controlled the neck, and Braddock went down like a building losing its foundation. Not thrown, guided, placed onto the canvas with an almost surgical gentleness that somehow made it worse. On the ground, Julian moved with the fluency of water filling a container. He passed Braddock's guard in one motion, knee slide, hip switch, chest pressure. Braddock scrambled, tried to bridge, tried to create space. Julian shut down every escape route before it opened. His weight distribution was perfect. His base was immovable. Braddock was thrashing against a locked door. Julian transitioned to back mount. His hooks sank in, both heels locked inside Braddock's thighs. His chest pressed flat against Braddock's spine, the most dominant position in all of combat sports. The position from which no champion, no contender, no human being on earth wants to find themselves. Braddock knew what was coming. Every fighter in the gym knew what was coming. Julian sank the rear naked choke. His right arm slid under Braddock's chin, bicep pressing against the carotid artery on one side, forearm compressing the other. His left hand locked behind Braddock's head and squeezed. Not violently, not vengefully, with the practiced, measured pressure of a man who had done this 1,000 times and understood exactly how many seconds of consciousness remained. Braddock fought it. He pulled at Julian's arm with both hands. He twisted. He bucked. He tried every escape he had ever been taught. None of them worked. 3 seconds passed. Braddock's hands stopped pulling. His body went still. Not unconscious, submitted. He tapped Julian's forearm twice. Quick, sharp. Julian released immediately. He didn't hold an extra second, didn't squeeze for emphasis. He let go the instant the tap came, the way a professional does, the way a man who respects the craft does, even when the man in his arms had shown him none. The gym erupted in a way that gyms aren't supposed to erupt. It wasn't applause. It wasn't cheering. It was chaos. Pure, unfiltered, primal chaos. People were screaming. People were jumping. Cliff Porter's live stream crashed and restarted and crashed again. The comments section had become a single, sustained roar. Julian stood up, extended his hand. Braddock lay on the canvas for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, breathing. Then he took Julian's hand and let himself be pulled to his feet. Julian leaned in close. His lips moved against Braddock's ear, so quiet that only Braddock could hear. Your right hook drops 2 inches when you're tired. Fix that. Braddock stared at him, mouth open, no words. Then Pete Harmon stepped into the cage. His eyes were red. His voice shook. You're the Phantom. Fort Bragg, 2016. I was there the night you took apart a Special Forces captain in 90 seconds flat. Everybody in that warehouse talked about it for years. The gym went from chaos to silence in one heartbeat. Julian didn't confirm it, didn't deny it. He just started unlacing his gloves. Ray Coleman climbed through the cage door. He was crying. He didn't try to hide it. Julian Shaw, 31-0, undefeated. He disappeared 8 years ago, and nobody ever knew why. He looked at the fighters around the cage. Until now. Braddock stood in the center of the cage, blood on his lip, sweat in his eyes, the belt around his waist suddenly feeling lighter than it ever had. He nodded once, slowly. I just got schooled by the janitor. His voice was rough, broken, and honestly, it's the best lesson I've ever had. The gym emptied slowly after the fight. Fighters drifted out in pairs and small groups, talking in low voices, replaying what they'd seen. Some of them looked at the mop and bucket near the back wall and felt something heavy settle in their chest. Others kept refreshing their phones, watching the clip count climb. Julian didn't stay for any of it. He pulled his janitor shirt back on, walked out the rear exit, and sat on the concrete steps behind the building. The parking lot was empty. The desert sun was starting its slow descent, painting the sky above the strip in shades of copper and blood. He sat there, with his forearms on his knees and his head bowed, still breathing through his nose, still quiet. But the stillness that had carried him through the fight was gone now. In its place was something heavier, the kind of weight that settles in after the adrenaline drains and the memory rushes back. He pulled his wallet from his back pocket, flipped it open. Inside, behind his driver's license, was a photograph. Creased, faded, worn soft at the edges from years of being touched. Terrence, 22 years old in the picture, grinning, wearing Julian's old Army PT shirt, 3 sizes too big on him, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, standing in front of the tire shop on Bragg Boulevard, shadowboxing at the camera, with his chin up and his guard down, the way kids fight when they don't know yet what fighting costs. Julian stared at the photo. His thumb moved across his brother's face. Slow, gentle, the way you touch something you're afraid of breaking, even though it's already broken. The back door opened. Ray Coleman stepped out and sat down beside him. Didn't say anything for a full minute. Just sat there in the heat, watching the same sky turn the same shade of burning. "How long did you know?" Julian asked, without looking up. "About 2 months in," Coleman folded his hands. "The way you moved around the gym, the way you checked equipment, the way you watched the fighters. Nobody looks at a heavy bag the way you do, unless they've spent a lifetime hitting one." He paused. "And then I saw the scar, and I remembered a story from Fayetteville." Julian was quiet for a long time. "His name was Terrence." "I know." "He was 22. "I know." "I taught him everything. How to stand, how to move, how to throw a cross without dropping his elbow." Julian's voice cracked for the first time. A hairline fracture in something that had been holding steady for 8 years. He took a fight I told him not to take, and I wasn't in his corner, because I was fighting on the same card, 2 cages apart. I heard the crowd go quiet, and I just knew. Coleman didn't touch him, didn't try to comfort him. He just sat there and let the words land where they needed to land. I stopped fighting that night, Julian said.
Left everything. I thought, if I could just stay away from it, if I could just be close enough to watch but never touch, I could keep it from hurting anyone else.
He looked at the mop leaning against the wall inside the open door. Turns out you can mop the same floor for 8 years, and the blood never really comes up. They sat in silence. A car alarm went off somewhere on the strip. A plane crossed the sky overhead, its contrail cutting the copper in half. The video's at 15 million, Coleman said finally. I got a call from the commissioner's office, 2 promoters, and a reporter from ESPN. Julian didn't react. They're calling you the Phantom. It's trending everywhere. The janitor who beat the champ. Coleman turned to look at him. People want to know who you are, Julian. I know who I am. That's not what I mean. Coleman's voice softened. Your brother didn't die because of fighting. He died because of a bad fight in a bad place with no doctor and no referee and no one to stop it when it needed to be stopped. He let that sit. What happened to Terrence was a tragedy. But you burying yourself in a janitor's closet for 8 years? That's a different kind of tragedy. Julian looked at the photo again. Terrence's grin, the too big shirt, the guard down. He would have hated this, Julian said quietly. Me hiding? Yeah, he would have. The next morning, Braddock posted a video to his Instagram. No filters, no edits, no music. Just him sitting in his car in the parking lot of Apex MMA, looking into the camera with a bruise on his cheek and humility in his voice. Yesterday, I got beat by a man I called a mop boy. I disrespected him because of how he looked and what he did for a living. And he didn't just beat me. He taught me something I should have learned a long time ago. He paused, swallowed. His name is Julian Shaw.
He's the most skilled fighter I've ever faced. And starting next week, he's my official sparring partner. He looked directly into the lens. I owe him more than a rematch. I owe him an apology. The video hit 40 million views in 48 hours. The hashtag #JanitorPhantom trended in 31 countries. And in the back of the gym, Julian Shaw's mop was leaning against the wall, right where he'd left it. Untouched. Like it was waiting. 6 months later, Julian Shaw walked through the front door of Apex MMA at 5 in the morning. Same time, same building, different man. He wasn't carrying a mop. His name was on the door now, not on a banner, not on a poster, on a small brass plate beside the entrance. Julian Shaw, head striking coach. Ray Coleman had offered him the position the week the video broke. Julian turned it down 3 times. The 4th time, Coleman just handed him a key and walked away. He knew Julian well enough by then to stop asking and start trusting. The gym looked the same, smelled the same, canvas and iron and ambition baked into the walls. But when Julian walked across the floor, people didn't look through him anymore. They looked at him, not with awe, not with fear, with respect. The kind you can't buy and can't fake. The kind you earn by mopping someone's floor for 8 years and never once complaining about it. Braddock was already there. He was always there now. First one in after Julian, last one out. His record had climbed to 25-1, 3 more title defenses, each one sharper than the last. His right hook no longer dropped when he got tired. Julian fixed that the first week. The spinning elbow took a little longer, but Braddock was a fast learner. Once he stopped pretending he had nothing to learn.
They trained together every morning. No cameras, no audience.
Just two men and a cage, and the quiet understanding that the best lessons come from the people you least expect. But the biggest change was the kids. The Terrence Shaw Foundation opened 3 months after the fight, a free combat sports program for at-risk youth in Las Vegas. Julian taught the basics himself: stance, movement, discipline, breathing. No underground cages, no unsanctioned bouts, no shortcuts. Every kid who trained there learned 2 things on day 1: how to throw a proper jab, and how to know when not to throw one. On a Tuesday morning, the same day of the week his brother died, Julian stood in front of his first full class. 14 kids, ages 12 to 17. Different backgrounds, different neighborhoods. Same look in their eyes. Hungry. Scared. Ready. A kid in the front row, 13 skinny, wearing basketball shoes 2 sizes too big, raised his hand. "Coach Shaw, were you really a janitor?" The room went quiet. Julian looked at the kid, looked at the mop still leaning against the back wall of the gym. He'd asked Coleman to leave it there. A reminder, not of where he'd been, but of what he'd survived. "I was a lot of things. A soldier, a fighter, a brother, a janitor." He paused. "But the floor taught me the most important lesson I ever learned." "What lesson?" Julian smiled. "The real kind. The kind that reaches the eyes. No matter how many times people walk over you, you can always stand back up." The class didn't applaud. They just picked up their gloves and got to work. Outside, the Las Vegas sun climbed over the mountains and poured through the gym windows, painting the canvas in gold. And somewhere in that light, if you listened closely, you could almost hear the sound of a mop hitting the floor. At 4:47 in the morning, the same rhythm, the same stroke, a heartbeat that never stopped.
What would you do if a champion challenged you to spar? Drop your answer in the comments. If this story hit you the way it hit me, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
Man. Just man. Imagine losing your little brother to the thing you love most and still choosing to walk back into it, not for revenge, not for money, but to make sure nobody else's little brother ends up on that floor. That's not fighting. That's healing.